Major General Jack Briggs and Lee Ellis, they're going to tell part of their story, that they were going to have coffee today. And then I said, no, we got to invite some friends.
I should get some coffee. I was having water now.
Right, so we said, no, this is too exciting, too amazing of this divine appointment for them to be able to be here. One thing I'll tell you is that when they met in person back in February, we were having a meeting, and Lee walked by the door of where we were meeting, and for many years, Jack will tell you, Lee was just one of his heroes of the faith, heroes in the military, and right, just in many ways. But I also want to thank our video crew. My son Brooks is here, and Benjamin and his team are here to capture this, so we'll be able to send it to you when it's over, and some highlights of that. And I'm Jessica Lally, by the way, so I am the founder of Voices to Connect, and I'm here with my business partner, Julie Schaffner. She's over there in the blue dress. And so many of you are friends, and we just wanted to gather you here. And for those of you who don't know, Voices to Connect, we think of ourselves as a boutique speaker agency, and we serve people in two ways. And one is that a lot of times we meet people, some of you are in this room, and one is sitting right here, that you have an important message, you have an amazing resume, but you need help getting your voice to be heard, to be more forward-facing. And so sometimes that's to be more forward-facing in your job, to be seen as an expert in your field. And so we get to be people's professional braggers and give them permission, we say, on how to show up without showing off. I think a lot of people that are very accomplished, like all of you in this room, maybe have seen people do it in a way that is not appealing, and so then you peel back drastically the other way. And so we are here to try to help give you permission on how to do that. And so as we've been walking alongside Jack, helping him be more digitally visual and have things, his expertise to match, that we wanted to help him do that. And so this is something that we hadn't planned, but just the way God put things together, we're really glad that these two men could have this conversation. And then the other way that Voices to Connect works is then we match these speakers with groups that need to hear them. And so, for example, Allegra here is from Club Management Association. So she has lots of events and needs different kind of thought leaders to come speak to equip people that help their companies not just improve their culture, but the bottom line. And so we really like working with groups like Allegra and others that need someone to come in to do that in a meaningful way, and it's not just fluff. So they can have impact going on, and that's what's about to happen today. So a little bit about Major General Jack Briggs. We're going to call him Jack.
Please.
But, you know, if you have a title, you should use it every now and then, right? His resume really is top tier, but he also has what it takes to back it up in real life. And we've been blessed to learn that from him over these past, 6 or 8 months, I guess, we've been working together. But Jack did serve in the Air Force for 31 years. He flew 225 flights, also known as sorties, right? Am I saying it the right way? Okay. In some of the most challenging operations. So in Desert Storm, Southern Watch, Northern Watch, Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom. And then he was in charge of maybe 35,000 troops in Afghanistan at the height of the time, but not during the collapse. Second topic. He also was the director of operations for the U.S. Northern Command in Colorado Springs, and was in charge of, this is really hard to explain, but it sounds crazy, the defense of North America. And how do you say that? From
the Arctic Circle to the Mexico-Guatemala border, and then the approaches from both oceans. So if anything that was, that.
So if anything went wrong when he was in charge, he calmed down. But no, he has served our country with such great honor. But today is not just about his military career. After retiring from the Air Force, Jack did not slow down. He earned his doctorate in education leadership and innovation while transforming how these major institutions would handle crises, and was overseeing security across New York universities, 15 global campuses. Then he moved over in his next not retiring job as the CEO of Springs Rescue Mission, which is Southern Colorado's largest homeless shelter and addiction recovery place. So he's been in places, I would just say, that require a lot of resilience and all being around all kinds of people. But now his current role is at the University of Colorado Boulder as the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Public Safety. And we feel like Jack has these real world crisis management skills and experience, but with a heart's desire to help university presidents, chancellors, and trustees make the tough decisions when their institutions need the steady leadership the most. And you can probably tell that Jack has had a hard time retiring. His wife said, "You're not good at that."
No, terrible at it.
But he and his wife Margaret have been married for 37 years. They have 3 grown kids. And Jack's here today turning over a new chapter to share some of his life's experience and highlight the honorable life of Colonel Lee Ellis.
That's great.
So,
Thank you, Jessica. So what are we going to do today? Lee and I are going to come up and we're just going to do some individual thing here just real quick. Then we're going to sit down and I get the privilege of asking Lee some questions, and then we'll kind of tie that up with some questions from you all if you'd like, and then we'll be on our way for Friday afternoon in Atlanta, and we're going to go to the airport. That's where we're going to go. Crisis decision making only gets better with training. What do I mean by that? So one of my jobs, I was the deputy commander of the Canadian NORAD region, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command. The responsibility of NORAD, which you might have heard of, is to defend the skies of Canada and the United States. And as the deputy commander in Canada, my responsibility was to really focus on Canadian airspace. If we were to choose to shoot down a threat aircraft, think like 9/11, the permission to do that comes from the Prime Minister of Canada. Okay? So when I got there into Canada, I asked my staff, I said, when was the last time the Prime Minister had trained for this? And unfortunately, they told me, never. And I said, oh, okay. So I called up the Prime Minister's office and I spoke to one of his chiefs of staff and said, when can we get the Prime Minister trained on this? And they said, Jack, you know, we have a great staff and he's a very good decision maker and he's just super busy. I'm like, okay, let's run a scenario. Let's say in 2 weeks, an aircraft gets hijacked and the hijackers say they're going to fly that aircraft into the Parliament building in Ottawa and kill as many people as they can. And the decision is made to shoot it down. The next day at the press conference, when the reporter asked the Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, how did you decide what you were going to do? He has a couple of options at this point. One, the option could be, well, I didn't really have a lot of training at this, so I listened to the generals, and they told me to do it, and so I did it. Or, this is the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life, and I will think about it every day. But I was trained. I understood the gravity of the decision that I had to make, but at the time, it was the best decision I could make to save lives on the ground. Which do you think would be a better answer? 2 weeks later, the Prime Minister's at our training facility getting trained. Smart guys and gals, they get it, right? So as they were leaving, though, this was the thing. As they were leaving, the individual that I had been working with, he comes to me and says, hey, Jack, I thought we were just coming here to kind of check a box. And what we realize now is that because we understand the process, we're going to make a better decision. I'm like, that's it, right? That training leads to a better decision under pressure. Now, in my 4 decades of pressure decisions, as a fighter pilot in combat, as a commander of roughly 35,000 warfighters in Afghanistan during the surge, as the defender of North America from ballistic missile attacks, floods, fires, hurricanes, counterterrorism, cyber, you name it. If it had to do with the Department of Defense, supporting the defense of North America, that came through my office. And then when I retired and went into higher education with thousands of students, faculty, and administrators across multiple campuses in multiple countries, I've recognized that the best decision makers have 3 characteristics. 3. The first is they make their decision based on principles. Principles. The second is they are humble enough to ask for help. And the third is they're decisive. So what does that look like? Imagine an archer, okay? So we've got an archer and there's targets all around her as she is getting ready to shoot her arrow. Your principles point in the direction of the target you're going to shoot at. It guides you right off the bat in this sector, in that direction, right? The second thing is she pulls the bow back about here, but if she is humble enough to ask for help, she'll fully empower the bow. Fully empower it for the best shot. And she's decisive. She doesn't hesitate here because she's confident that she's making the best decision that she could make at the time. Just like that prime minister, right? Best decision we can make at that time. Now, today, we're going to talk about some concepts like those and how they relate to honor and accountability. And I'm excited to do that. But what I'm really looking forward to today is the opportunity to learn from an American hero, an absolute American hero. Shot down over North Vietnam in 1967, Lee Ellis started a 5.5-year ordeal of mental, physical, and emotional torture and challenge. His success in that environment is a testimony to his courage, his faith, and his devotion to his fellow POWs. Now, we're going to get a chance to kind of go through a lot of this, but it's not just his time as a POW, because you see, when he emerged from the camps in 1973, he first of all, he probably did the best decision that he ever did, which was he met Mary, his wife, and got married in 1974, so 73, 74, right? And he started his own, he got back into his Air Force career as a pilot, as a commander, as a leader. And he had a very successful career retiring as a colonel. When he retired as a colonel, he started in the business world, but he knew he had something special to tell others with humility, right? So not only in his own business, but as a mentor to others. And this is where I came across Lee Ellis, is he started writing. And I'm thankful for it. So this book, Leading with Honor, when I first read this, that's it. That's leadership. And as an Air Force leader, it came just at the right time for me. Right? And there's several other books that are available here. Those books were mentoring to me. And he's taken that skill and he's not only built it in his own businesses, but he's brought that to companies and leaders to help challenge them to understand the importance of honor in their personal lives and in their culture of their business. So I want to just maybe capture this last thought, which is those surviving, the living POWs from Vietnam today are in their 80s and 90s. Think about that. So someday, unfortunately, the only way we're going to know what they went through is we're going to read their books and we're going to see captured video of their voices. But not today. Not for us. Today we have the incredible privilege to be in the room with an American hero and hear his voice and talk and interact. We need to respect and take advantage of this incredible opportunity. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce one of my personal heroes, Colonel Lee Ellis.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's great to be with you all, and thank you so much, Jack, for that and for bringing me here today. And I really appreciate all of you for hosting us, and Jessica and your team. I'm an old country boy, grew up plowing mules and driving tractors, but I always wanted to fly. From the time I was 5 years old, when we went to had a picnic down on Sunday after church, went down to the Athens Memorial Park, and they had a World War II fighter plane there. And my dad picked me up and set me on the wing, and I went over and looked in the cockpit, and I said, this is me. And I passed when I went to the University of Georgia, I passed the physical sophomore year. I was in ROTC. Every male had to be in ROTC back then, because if you went to a state university, across the country, every male had to be in ROTC for 2 years. So we had Army and Air Force at Georgia, and I, of course, went in the Air Force. And in my sophomore year, they said, you want to be in the Air Force? And I said, yes. And so I took the test and passed it, and I took the physical and passed it for the flying group. And so then I went 2 more years of ROTC while I was at Georgia. And I was the worst student ever to graduate in 4 years at the University of Georgia, but I was a distinguished graduate of ROTC. And I got a regular commission. And I went to flight school with half of the academy guys. There were more than 50% of the academy guys in my class. So, and then it was August 1966, and more than half of us in our class got assigned F-4 Phantom pipeline Southeast Asia, which meant the war was building up in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, and we were going to go pipeline. That meant you're going to get combat trained and then go straight over to Vietnam. And that's what I did. So within a few months, a year, or less than a year, I was in Vietnam. And on my 53rd mission, my airplane blew up. We were getting shot at. We were bombing there. They were bringing, we mainly bombed to get them to stop bringing troops and maintenance or materials into the South Vietnam to attack the South Vietnamese. So that's what we were doing. Now, was the strategy proper, best? No. I had been there 3 months. I was 23 years old, and I knew this was not the way to win the war. But the Secretary of Defense back in Washington, D.C. was telling us which places to bomb and where to bomb them. And he had never been in the military. So that's interesting. You got to delegate. This is what he's talking about here. You got to have people prepared and tell them what to do overall, the big mission, and let them do it, accomplish it. Because when you're away from the environment of what that mission is going to be, you don't know everything, and you got to trust them. So anyway, but I spent 5.5 years there, and I was the 3rd youngest guy who's still alive. That was, I probably was the 3rd youngest guy of the 5 to 8 year POWs. Now the bombing stopped in '68, and we didn't have any more POWs for almost 3 years, okay? So a 5 to 8 year group, and then there was a small group then came in '72 when the bombing started again. The war ended in January '73, and then we came home in 60 days after that. So I was the 3rd youngest guy, and usually the youngest guy in some of the camps. We had several camps around Hanoi, and I was very fortunate to have good leadership, and I was locked in a cell 6.5 by 7 feet for the first 8 months in Hanoi, in the Hanoi Hilton, which is what the name we gave it. It was the Hoa Lo, which was the French built that prison in the 1890s. It had 14-foot walls around it, and several 3 feet walls around it, and no one ever escaped from that prison. And that's where we went, first 8.5 months there. And I was in this cell, small cell, tiny cell. It was about the size of a bathroom in a gas station on the highway in Georgia out here somewhere, you know. It was 6.5 by 7 feet. And there's 4 of us in that cell for the next 8.5 months. Well, you know, when I was captured, I did my parachute landing fall, and I hit all the 5 points that I was supposed to hit, and I wasn't badly injured. I didn't feel injured at the time. Now, my head was bent down like that because I went through 20 G's as I ejected from the airplane, and that night, my head was just hardly could lift it up, and I had a big cut here and a big cut here, but I was okay. And there's 3 or 4 militia guys coming at me, and I jumped in a bomb crater, old bomb crater, and I pulled out my radio. Back then we had a battery-powered radio for emergency, and I said, I'm 200 meters north of the river, start strafing at 300, I'm headed south to the river, because this river emptied into the Gulf of Tonkin. And I wanted to get there and just get rescued. Well, they started closing in, 3 or 4 guys started closing in, and I disconnected my parachute. I pulled out my .38 pistol. I had 2 rounds of tracer and 3 rounds of ball and nothing under the hammer. It was a revolver. And I decided, we had been trained in survival school that these guys, the militia is not all that well trained, so try to escape. And I fired a round of tracer right over their heads, and they didn't flinch. I thought I just wanted to run them away, you know, and I'd get in the river. Well, they didn't flinch, and one guy picked up several of them picked up pointed their rifles at me, and one guy pulled out a little paper in his pocket, and he said, in phonetics, he was reading phonetics, it was for them, hands up, surrender, no die. And I thought, that's probably a good idea. And I threw away my pistol, put my hands up, and they captured me. And, you know, they should have shot me. They really should have shot me. And they captured me, and I was up until that point, mind was working greatly, and but from that point, I went into shock. And they blindfolded me, they tied my hands behind my back, and they put a rope around my neck where they could lead me around like a dog, and they took me over to the next village. And anyway, it took me 2 weeks to get to Hanoi, but I realized right away, and the guy that was a militia guy that was in charge of taking me north toward Hanoi, we were in the southern part of North Vietnam, so we were a long ways from Hanoi. He was in charge, but he was a good soldier, and he would not let them beat me up. He would not let the local population, and the communists would get out there in a little village with a bullhorn, and they'd try to come beat me up, and he would push them back, he and his soldiers. And so I'd been a Christian all my life, and I just knew that God had a place for me, and he was going to keep me alive. And I'd lost 2 roommates prior to my shoot down, and they didn't come home. And so I got to Hanoi, and I went in that 6.5 by 7 foot cell, and I had a leader for the next 3 years that was New York State wrestling champion in high school, and he was tougher than I was, and I wanted to be like him. And initially, I wanted to be like him in every way. But after living with him for several months and years, I lived with him for 3 years, 5 years. Actually, he was my boss for 3 years. But he wasn't perfect, but he was mighty good, and he was the perfect guy to be a leader in that situation. And he set a good example for me, and I wanted to be like him. So what I'm saying is, your people are going to look to you, and if you have strength and courage and live with honor and listen to them also, they're going to want to serve you, and they want to be like you. And with that, I'll sit down.
All right. Well, that's quite the introduction. I mean, I don't know how many of us, have that sort of story to start off. Now let's talk. But I hope it just gives you an inkling of the character of this leader. And what we're going to do here is we've kind of talked about some questions to really tease out some of the big points here. So I'm going to start off with, and I'll ask questions, he'll answer, and we'll just go from there. How do you combine honor and accountability from your POW, your leadership, and personal experiences? Honor and accountability.
We had memorized, all the military people back then had memorized, and probably today, the Code of Conduct, 6 articles of the Code of Conduct that said you will be faithful, you'll be faithful to your country, you'll resist the enemy, and you'll be faithful to your fellow POWs. It's written after the Korean War. They didn't have that, and a lot of people collaborated with the communists in the Korean War. And so we had all memorized that, and that we were going to be loyal to our country and never share anything with the communists, with our captors, and that we were going to be faithful to each other and take care of each other and obey the commands of our boss. That was very important for us because, and our leaders took the most torture, and they were in solitary confinement for 4 years. They were there 7.5 years. I was only there 5.5 years. And they were there 7.5 years. And so when they bounced back, and they were such a great example, and they communicated to us we had a motto, return with honor. It started out as resist, survive, return with honor. And that was our motto. But one of our leaders, the early leader, General Robin Reisner, said, be a good American, live by the Code of Conduct. Resist up to the point of permanent damage, physical or mental damage, and then go ahead and give in, give as little as possible, and bounce back. Because they were trying to torture us for information about our base or whatever. We didn't know what was going to be flown, missions are going to be flown the next day or the next hour. And they were trying, really what they wanted was, they wanted us to make propaganda for them, because they could use it to fight against the war back home and say, oh, POWs said the war is bad, you know. That's what they were trying to get. And so, and then bounce back to resist again. Bounce back. Bounce back. You know, when you suffer, you got to learn to bounce back. And then pray every day, go home proud, return with honor. And that, you know, when you have an organization and you have a few things about what to do, and the people at the lowest level know those, they're going to probably serve you well. And that was really powerful for us. And I got to know Colonel Reisner. He's one that put that, he was senior leader, put that out. He lived, he was there 7.5 years. He lived 3 months short of 89. And he had been an ace in the Korean War. He was a famous fighter pilot, and he was humble and he was confident. And that's what you got to be.
If you've ever met fighter pilots, we don't lack confidence. That's one thing we don't lack in any time, in any place. I think one of the points that, what I think about when Lee says this is clarity. It's clarity of what's important to you as the leader and for the organization. And if you don't tell your folks what's important, they're going to think everything's important. And they're going to try to make everything important. So sometimes you have to say, this, for whatever this is good enough. Whatever this is, better is what I'm searching for. And very rarely you might say, I need you to be perfect here.
Right.
Very rarely. Mm-hmm. But if you do that, if you give some priorities and you give some guidelines to those that you're leading, and you give it in that kind of an order, they'll understand where to put their priorities. The idea that I don't have to be perfect in everything. There's some stuff I can just do good. Right? And it helps them to be much more effective. Right?
I have a quote somewhere out in there in my, from Colin Powell about that. That's what he said.
Right.
General Colin Powell.
So Lee talked about the honor code or the code of conduct, and there's one for everybody here. It's called the honor code, and it's his version that you would be able to look at in your own life today, not in the sense of being a POW, but being a leader. So I just point that out that'll be there.
Yeah, I did that back about 10 or 12 years ago because the code of conduct was so important for us. And then I started struggling with honor. How can people remind themselves and coach themselves to be honorable? And I have to coach myself every day on it, okay? If you're not coaching yourself, you're going to step out, because that's the way human beings are. Ever since Adam and Eve, people have gotten off track. And every person you read about in the Old Testament and New Testament made some sinful mistakes. And so we all can do that too. So you got to coach yourself every day.
Yeah. Next question. And it has to do with a card that's sitting on your table in front of you. So if you'll reference that, it's the courageous accountability model. So could you kind of just tell everybody the key points of this model that you developed?
Yeah. Character, I'm a visual person. I'm totally opposite from my wife. We're 3 standard deviations apart on patience. She is very patient and I got none. It's most fighter pilots don't have patience, right?
Fighter pilot.
And so, are you married to a patient person?
The most patient person on the planet, let me tell you.
That's good. So I have a visual model. I like visual models. And so I designed this model for this book, Engage with Honor book, because in 2012, 13, 14, 15, I just started seeing so much dishonorable behavior going around everywhere. And when I wrote this book, there were 3 governors in jail. 3 governors of the 50 states were in jail, former governors, okay? And mayors, there were probably 80 or 90 or 100 mayors in jail. And in Atlanta, 15 teachers and people, 10 to 15 teachers and people in the Atlanta educational system were convicted of lying on their students' exams so they could score higher. It was a national exam, so they could score higher and they could make more money. And that's pretty much in the first chapter here, a lot of other stuff. And so I wrote this book, and when I designed it, I put character, courage, and commitment in the core of it. Character, courage, and commitment. You got to be committed. You got to have character, and you got to coach yourself on your character every day. But to do that, you've got to have courage. There's a river of fear that we all have. And sometimes fear for my wife is different from fear from me, and vice versa. But you've got to coach yourself with courage to cross that river of fear. There's a great book written about courage, and I quote that somewhere in my books. And to be the person you want to be, you've got to sometimes courageously step forward and be willing to take a risk. You may get fired for doing courageously living up to your character. It'll bounce back. So character, courage, and commitment is kind of the core of that. And then you got to clarify, you got to connect with people and let them know you believe in them, you care about them, and then you can coach them and you can correct them, okay? And you got to collaborate. You got to get people together. Now, one of the presentations I made last year was for a company that owns 200 or 300 hospitals around the nation. And I talked to the CEO to get information about what their challenge was. He said, well, we buy the hospital over here, and the CEO is running all of this hospital, but he doesn't want to listen to what our decisions are. Okay, he just wants to do what he's always done. And so I talked about you got to listen. You can't be a silo. You got to collaborate and listen to others and that sort of thing. And then you got to celebrate or confront. So it's all C words there, celebrate or confront. And I have a chapter in this book right here on all of those.
So when you leave today, there'll be some of these books sitting out in the back, and you can dig into each one of the steps that you see on that card. And I challenge you to spend some time thinking about that in your own perspective. One of the things that I got out of it is that he used the word risk. And for the most part, I'm going to tell everybody in here it's kind of the same for us all. If I said, how risk tolerant are you, you would give me some version, very high, we, fighter pilots, experience that we've had, very high risk tolerance. Some people are low risk tolerance. You as a leader need to let your staff, the people that work for you, know what your tolerance is. High or low, it doesn't really matter. They just need to know. So that when they bring you options, they're in your comfort zone a little bit. And maybe they'll push on it a little bit because it's a good idea to get out of that comfort zone every once in a while. But I'll tell you this, every one of you is probably pretty good with operational risk. You can tangibly kind of think about that. Mission's going to happen or it's not going to happen? What's the risks to it? Financial risks. You can get CFOs and people and they can do the math. This is the one that gets everybody and it sticks. And particularly in higher education where I work, reputational risk. This is what everybody gets kind of caught on because they don't want to blow this. And that reputational risk, you can manage that better if you're dealing with these principles of character and courage and commitment. When you do that, you can make decisions, even though they're hard ones and they're risky, because you're using the right principles to start with. Yeah? Okay. Recently, if you do follow Lee and if you don't follow him on something like LinkedIn, he's been talking about resilience. And so obviously as a POW, resilience was an incredibly important part of what happened for you. Can you talk about that in the culture of organizations?
Yeah, you've got to be committed to your life mission and what you're doing. That's the foundation for resilience at work and life everywhere. And then you got to realize that everybody's going to suffer. Suffering is part of our life. And the people who suffer and stay positive in the suffering, now you may not be able to stay positive in the morning, but by the end of the day and the next day, you got to be positive and believe that someday I'm going to come through this. And staying positive was so critical. The research has shown that staying positive was the number one thing that enabled us to resist, survive, and return home with honor. There's a bad quote about Admiral Stockdale saying optimism, because another one of the senior leaders who was equal to him was always thinking positively and throwing about, we're going home next week or next month or something. And so that part was optimism. But the guy lasted 7.5 years and lived longer than Stockdale because he stayed positive and stayed optimistic. And so staying positive is very important for part of resilience. But you also have to be in community. You've got to be connected with some people who understand what you're going through. And that's where PTSD has really skyrocketed, partly because of people growing up not having responsibility and not having bad things happen growing up. Nowadays, they're protected so much. But a lot of it is just not being able to bounce back and staying connected to community. Because the veterans today come home and they don't connect with their people, with anybody who's been a veteran who's been wounded or been stressed out, you know. In the old days, we had the American Legion and the disabled veterans and all those things where they got together on Friday night and Wednesday night and had a beer together and they talk and share their stories. But in World War II, it took them 2 months to come home on the ship. And so they were sharing with each other about their experience. So sharing with somebody in a community, staying connected that way is so important. And you just got to believe that someday I'm going to bounce back and come through this. And guess what? The POWs from Vietnam have lower PTSD than the combat veterans who fought in the Vietnam and in the wars recently. We have lower PTSD. We're outliving our peers. Our average age is 86. And it's there's a great lesson in that, because we believed that we could do it, and we suffered. I suffered about the least of anybody in there, and I was tortured twice, and was spent a few days in isolation, but not very long, because I was so junior ranking. But we have been so resilient, and a few years ago, I was at a reunion in San Antonio. We have a reunion used to be every 5 years, 3 years. Now it's 2 years. Every 2 years we have a reunion. And we're sitting around and talking. There's about 8 of us around the table. And one of the guys, we were talking about what our experience had been and what we'd done. And one of the guys said, I would never volunteer to be a POW, but I wouldn't change a thing. My life has been so good. And everybody at that table agreed with him. And we were all colonels and one general, and the other guy was a 4-star. He was the only one that made 4-star, Chuck Boy. I lived with him for 3 years, and he made 4 stars, and he was retired. And
Generals are very suspect, I'm just going to tell you. We say all kinds of stuff.
But can you imagine everybody agreeing that their life was better because they've been a POW? So suffering, you learn a lot of lessons in suffering if you keep the right attitude. And if you're in community, that's so important.
I think for all of us, this concept of shared suffering, we've had something like that in our lives, where we've had a hard thing and we've shared it with somebody else. The bond that's created by that is almost unbreakable, right? Someone that sat with you in the mud, where the two of you or the three of you or your team has suffered, and you've become stronger for it. When I talk with my my chancellors and presidents and boards and those, and I talk about this idea of resilience, one of the fears that they have, I remember I'm talking to groups of leaders who have to make the hard decision, right? They're the ones who, none of the options are very good. And they are going to end up picking the least worst option. That's what I like to call it, the least worst option, right? And they have to own that. Their fear is they're going to get judged by the outcome. And I try to coach them that what I'm really looking for them at that point is they're going to have to make a hard decision. They're going to have to suffer through this. But that's the focus, is did I make the right decision at the time? The outcome will be what the outcome is. Luck, challenges, maybe it goes exactly right. But it's this moment where we're suffering together to get this decision made. And when we do that, our confidence level in each other increases because we're vulnerable enough to say, this is hard. Right? The vulnerability piece. That's how that's where we build that trust in an organization that is unbreakable, even when things don't go right. Fighter pilots. We love our airplanes. In fact, if you don't think so, ask us. And we'll talk about our planes for a long time. And one of the things we do in fighters is we fly in formation. We fly next to each other, kind of whether it's in the weather or to get through something, you'll fly right next to each other. And there's a lot of positioning that you want to be in the right position, but you're always drifting a little bit. And an analogy that I've heard you talk about is honor. Maybe that's the standard. And as we're flying formation around it, we keep drifting away from that. Can you talk about how your philosophy about getting back into there?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'll say this again later. You have to believe in yourself. You wouldn't be here today if you were somebody, somebody very valuable, okay? Everybody's valuable. You have to believe in yourself, but you have to know that sometimes you're going to get out of position. You get off track. You're going to deviate. You're going to drift away, and you got to correct back, and correct back, and correct back. And that is, you know, the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels. I was with one of the leaders of the Thunderbirds who retired in the late 80s, and I was working with him at Bell South here in Atlanta. He was running their aviation company there for a while, and we were talking, and I got him to speak at another event for another client. But he was talking about that, and he shared that, you know, we'd go out and practice. Now, when you look at the Thunderbirds and Blue Angels, it looks like they're in perfect position, okay? And they're 3 feet apart or less. Now, when we flew in T-38s and F-4s, we were always 3 feet apart unless we wanted to slip out here. 3 feet apart, going 500 miles an hour, 3 feet apart, you got to correct and be safe there. And he said, when we practiced, the Thunderbird practice, when we came back, we debriefed. And by the way, there's the Blue Angels, there's a video on YouTube of the Blue Angels debriefing, and they debrief. And everybody shares what mistakes happened. And he said, when we debrief, it's rare that we're above 85% accurate. We hardly ever get into 90%. So We made mistakes. We corrected back. We made mistakes. We corrected back. And so everybody, every human being is that way. So I want to tell you, you've got to stop and reflect. Reflecting about your day, about your decision, and putting all that together, about your relationships with your spouse, with your kids, you back away and just reflect and be humble about it. Be confident, but be humble about it. Nobody's perfect. And think about what I didn't know a long time ago was one child is very different from another child. And you've got to relate to your children totally different because they're like me and my wife. You got to get in my face and tell me, Lee, don't do that. And my wife, you can just say, honey, I think you should do this. And she'll respond. And you got to think, you got to reflect. And so I think that's the reflecting and coaching yourself is the way to stay correct back before you get out here. And stay connected to your honor code. Whatever your honor code is, you got to stay connected to that first. And you got to also listen to other people.
When we think about this formation flying as an example, in society today, sometimes this person that's the wingman is out of position and believes that the leader should move towards them to be back in position, right? And what I would say is that we, as leaders, we need to have those external principles that are rock solid. Those are the principles that we're going to judge, are we close to them or are we drifting away from them? And by reflecting, how far away are we getting and how fast? How the rate of us leaving, right? Are we compounding bad decisions? Or can we start to make better decisions to move ourselves back? And if we're really honed in on what our principles are, we'll start to recognize that we're moving almost instantly. And we'll say, I'm not going to do that. And I can make a much smaller correction back. What does that look like? You're in a business meeting and someone says something that kind of goes against what the ethos of the organization, the culture of the organization is, but you really want this business. And you say, yeah, maybe we should, if we're tied really closely to these principles, we're going to be able to say very quickly, that's just not who we are. That's not what we do. We may not be the right company for you. You may not be the right kind of client for us because you recognize it very early because your principles and your values are very clear. This is not a controversial question, but I think it's an important one when we talk about these things like principles and compromising and those sorts of things. So I hear you discuss the importance of results, okay, for an organization. And how does that compare to when you were a POW and some of the things that you had to do, were they compromising to survive? Did you feel like, if I just compromise here just a little bit, it'll be okay because the result will be okay, even though it's compromising maybe some of those principles? How did you deal with that?
I hadn't thought about this question before, this angle, but yes, I lied, I cheated, and I stole in the POW camp from our enemy, from our captors. And we all did. I had never done those things before, but in that situation, I was doing that, lie, cheating, and steal, because they were our enemy. But to my friends who were POWs, I was totally committed to them. And we would take great risk if someone's in solitary confinement over here, we would take a lot of risk to get to them and say, hey, man, how you doing? We're not going to leave without you. We're not going home without you. And let them know that we cared about them. But with the enemy, for those things that were true, we stood up for. We stood up for our government. We stood up for honesty and all those sort of things. But we would lie when they tortured us to put, I don't lie. That's when we would lie. When they tortured us to say something that was not true, we would say something that was not true. Totally different for them. So, you know, there's another angle of this. We were being tortured in our camp in 1969 because the women, mainly the women and families, but mainly the women were stepping out and putting a lot of pressure worldwide on the communists of North Vietnam about our treatment, because they had signed an agreement in 1954 to treat POWs, captured people, lenient and humanely, and they were not treating us that way. So they were violating that rule. And so they had a one-page document that they were torturing us to sign that we had received lenient and humane treatment, okay? And one of the guys in my camp who was being tortured, he said, that's not true, you're torturing me. You've tortured me before, and you're about to torture me again. Why should I sign that? They wanted him to sign that, see. Why should I sign that? And he said, it's not true. And they said, truth is that which most benefits the party. Now that is a very dangerous thing, and we have got to be very careful about that in our country, because there's some people that are thinking that would help. We can tell some lies about this and we can get what we want. You can't do that. You got to be committed to living up to your values and that sort of thing.
What is the untold subtext of maybe what he just said is, for us as leaders, we're the ones who set that standard. Everyone will go off of what we do, how we behave. And so we need to own that as leaders and be tougher on ourselves maybe than we expect from others. Because people are going to make mistakes. So, Lee, when POWs made a mistake, mm-hmm. they fell short of the standard. Mm-hmm. Just like when people do that in a company or in your relationships. How did you bring them back? How did you get them back towards that standard again?
Well, the first time I was tortured, and I filled out a 3-page biography, and everything on it was a lie except my father's first and last name, because I wanted to get a letter someday. I did 2.5 years later. But after I filled that out, they tied me back up and blindfolded me in the torture room. And I cried like a baby because I was so ashamed. I hadn't lived up to the code of conduct, which said you won't collaborate with the enemy, you won't do anything for the enemy, you won't do anything they want you to do. And I had done something. And I didn't know then what the Colonel Reisner had put out, because I had no contact. We were isolated. We're always isolated from other cells. And that's why we took great risk to communicate with them. But I cried like a baby. I was so ashamed. I would never expect me to do that. And I got back to my cell, and one guy had been there. He'd been back for 2 hours. He'd been tortured, the same thing, and he had been back 2 hours. He didn't last as long as I did. And Captain Fisher, who was the tough guy I mentioned earlier, he was 5 or 6 hours later, and he came back. And he said, guys, we did our best. And about 2 or 3 months later, we found out what Reisner had said, and that is you give it all you got and resist until you're permanently damaged, mentally or physically, and go ahead and give in and give as little as possible. So later, when we were with new POWs and they were tortured and they were shamed and felt, we said, hey, we've been there, we've done that, it's okay. You did your best. You did your best, and let's bounce back.
So when we're leading people, we have to have empathy. Right? Empathy is one of the most important leadership traits.
Right.
It's not soft. It's hard. Empathy is hard because you have a standard, and people will fall short. But if they're doing their best, if they're trying their best, that's the time to dig in. Was this a training issue? Was it a commitment issue? Was it a lack of direction on my part? Because I just said everything is a first priority, and now you fell short. And the diabolical thing here is if I don't give them good direction, if they fall short, I might just think they're not good because I didn't give them enough clarity about what was priority and how far to go. Like Colonel Reisner did as the leader, and Admiral Stockdale did as the leader. They defined the definition of where that standard was, and they asked you to get as close to that as possible. And when you fell short, they had empathy because they'd been there as well. And you could bring people back and strengthen them from that shared suffering. I think we have time for one more question before we kind of open it up to the group. All right? And I have like 8 more questions. So I've got to figure out which would be, we'll kind of do a wrap-up one here, right? Which is, how do you see your main principles applying to the new generation of leaders? And we've got some younger leaders here in the room. How does it apply to them in society today?
I think you got to set an example, and you got to talk to them about. I use the yin and the yang model. I think I'm a visual person. The yin and the yang model. On the yin side of that model, it's a circle with a little divider between it, and it's just kind of wiggly around, but it's 2 pieces of that circle. And one piece is your values and standards. And there you've got to live up to those. You've got to be willing to sacrifice to live up to those. And on the other side, you're going to have to adapt and shift and reinvent the wheel. And if you don't do that, change is, you're going to be left behind. Like, what was the old Kodak? They didn't change quick enough, They got left behind. So, but on the other side is your pieces of character, values, and those sorts of things. Your mission statement that you got to accomplish. And I think that helps me a lot. And I would sit down and talk with younger person and say, look, this, okay, over here, the yin, but the yang, you got to change. But you don't change this. Can you be committed to this? Because thousands of years now, this has been proven to be the best thing you can do, the best way you can live, and to be an honorable person.
Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to say, I thought about, I'm getting forgetful now, I'm so old, but I thought about this a minute ago, is that when you have an organization, tell your people, your managers that work directly for you, the people that work directly for you, or people on your team, if you disagree with me, if you don't think I'm headed in the right direction, come in and sit down and let's talk, and you give me your perspective. I may buy into it, I may not, but I need to know your perspective because you may be seeing something I don't see, and you may be right and I'm wrong. So I'm going to listen to you. And that's one of my 6 items that I brief all of my people who work for me. Don't be afraid to come and conflict with me and just say, I disagree, and here's why. And I'll listen to you. I may not buy it, but I'll listen to you. And I won't feel, you'll feel valued. I'll feel value you, okay?
So it's kind of a military ethos, I think, for leaders, and I'll just throw this out there. When I would take over command, I would always get my junior leadership in the room, and I would say, here's the deal. You have to be able to disagree with me. I am disagreeable. And I mean that in disagree-able. You are able to disagree with me, the general, the colonel, the commander. Why? Well, quite frankly, I always agree with myself, like 100% of the time. And so I need people around me who are willing to push back, right? And in that moment, I'm gonna hear things that I haven't thought of. God didn't put me on this earth to solve every problem. I'm not equipped to solve every one of them. I think I am, but I'm not, right? And so I need other people to help me when I don't see the same thing that they do, right? As we bring that in. For me, when it comes to young leaders, I have, in any kind of a crisis decision making, if you take nothing else from what I say, there's 4 questions that you need to ask young leaders, and they need to be prepared to answer them. Now, the cool thing about this is I'm not going to ask them other questions. I'm going to prep them by saying, these are the 4 questions I'm going to ask you. You need to be prepared to answer these 4 questions. Now, I tell my bosses, ask me these 4 questions. Don't ask me something else, ask me these 4. This really helps during a crisis because it focuses people on a solution right away because we're all in the same sheet of music. First question is, what do we know? Tell me what you know. For fact. Not made up, not what I think. For fact. That may not be a lot of stuff to start with. The second question is more important, and that is, what don't we know? Because you see, if I, the leader, ask my subordinate junior leader what they don't know, 1, I'm giving them permission to not know stuff. That's liberating, because now when they did that first question, what do we know, and they know the second question is coming, I can trust more about what they answered in the first one because they're not making it up, because they've got permission to not know. The second great thing about this is they don't have to wait to come to talk to me. Because if I say, you're not going to know stuff, they're not in their office or off to the side going, well, Jack might ask this and this, or he might ask that. We should all get answers to all of those before we go to the boss. Instead, they're going to come to me quicker with, here's what we know and here's what we don't know. The third thing is, what are we doing about it? That's the third question. Why is this important? I'm empowering them to go out and figure out the things that we don't know. I'm giving them the power to go do that. I'm not saying go solve it this way, because as leaders, we're successful, we're smart, we have pattern recognition of things that have happened in the past, but we also really like to solve the problems that we like to solve. And so when we get a new problem, we kind of manipulate it so that it's kind of like a problem we solved before, and we slap our answer on it, when that may not be the problem at all. We just like to solve it that way. Right? So I'm giving them the power. Go out and solve this and come back to me with a fill-in. The last thing I ask them is, who else needs to know? This empowers them to tell me to go do something. Like, you need to go work with, if it's the chancellor, the provost. Like, somebody's got to go talk to the faculty, because the faculty are going to not like this. So they need to be informed at a minimum. And the deans, in my world of higher ed, that's always where I'm going, is I'm telling my boss, the chancellor, we probably need to talk to the deans. Right? What's great about that is I've given my boss something to do besides wait around the phone and call me every 15 minutes with, like, you got an update? How about now? What about now? They have a task now, right? And it's an appropriate task because it's up and out of the organization. It's not down and in while we're trying to solve this. We're coaching these young leaders because they don't really get a lot of this coaching anymore, because they're not in the office getting it face to face with you as often as maybe in the past. So what we're trying to do here today with this short time that we've had together is we're trying to maybe introduce some ideas. But I'm sure that some of you might have questions. So why don't we open it up right now for a couple of questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
I would just like to say that the things that resonated the most with me that you said, and Lee, you said, had to do with humility and coaching yourself every day, being adaptable. Because what I've learned painfully in my career, and I've been in leadership positions on the nonprofit and the for-profit side for many years, boy, I learned the hard way that leadership is more from the inside out rather than the outside in. Yes, we got to have the principles and the vision and be able to share those clearly and competently. But boy, if we're not willing on the inside to coach ourselves every day, as you say, Lee, and to be humble and ask the right questions and be willing to adapt to the team you have, then we're in for a lot of trouble. That really resonated with me, and honestly, it confirmed to me that much of leadership is inside out. If we're not willing on the inside to change and grow, then we're in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm. I have an insecure, secure model I designed. Insecure over here and secure over here. And the more secure you can be, the more confident you can be, but the more humble you can be. And the more humble you can be, the more you can coach yourself, adapt and grow. I'm still coaching, I'm almost 82, and I'm still coaching myself every day to adapt and to do things better.
Yes, Leroy.
I liked your 4 questions that you ask. I'll kind of dig in there a little bit. With my previous organization, I had a lot of successes, but I also had a lot of failures. One of the failures, when we started growing really fast and having success and people found out that we existed, I brought in the quote unquote experts to run the business, which was one of my biggest mistakes. And so I threw myself in the fire of, I really hate opening my mouth unless I'm like 99% confident I'm right, and I hate being wrong. And so I have really good instincts and gut, and I love information, but I wouldn't open my mouth and argue against them unless I knew I was right. And I learned many, many times I should have opened my mouth because I was 60% sure. And talking to that more, because both y'all are nodding and know what I'm talking about, because that's something for me to grow as a leader. I still need to work on. I learned some lessons, but
Yeah.
yeah, both are.
You mentioned the word gut.
Yep.
Okay, so your gut is maybe a starting point, right? And you need to know your gut. Some people's guts are pretty good. Like there's more than 50%, they're kind of on point, that the direction is that way, right? Some people, it's the opposite. They hang out with the wrong people. They think that they're going to be fine. They date the wrong people because that's whatever, right? Their gut is kind of bad. Reflecting on how my gut tends to turn out is probably the valuable thing, right? Because if my gut is kind of right most of the time, I should follow it. If my gut is kind of wrong most of the time, that's almost as useful, because don't do that, right? Do the other thing, right? So that gut is the first, it's a first check, but I want you to be careful about just going with your gut, because your gut also tends to fall in line with the things that you like to do. You know, I mentioned solving the problems that you like to solve. And so thinking through your gut and getting you pointed in kind of the right direction, you got to have somebody else around you that you trust, that says, hey boss, I see where we want to go with this, but is that the best direction? I know you're objective, but is that the best direction? Because think of it this way. A lot of people try to do something to be something, right? They do something and they say, if I do this enough, I will be like that to get the outcomes that I want. But I'm going to tell you that's backwards. You want to be somebody that does these kinds of things to get that outcome. Being this means I know who I am. I am confident in who I am. I've become the person that I'm trying to be, and I'm working towards that all the time. I'd like these outcomes. I'm trying to do these things. If I'm not getting the outcome, I'm not going to change who I am. I'm going to change the things that I do. Right? That's a framework that I try to use, is to be the person I'm trying to be. Do the things that that kind of person does to get the outcome. Kind of, it's better with pictures. I wish I had pictures, but yeah.
That's helpful. I appreciate it.
Did you want to mention anything there?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so I served 11 years in the United States Air Force, guidance control specialist, and my son followed me, and he served 6 years in the Army. Never served in war, but he suffers from PTSD, as you said, the younger guys do today. So what could you tell me to share with him how to be mentally and emotionally strong during those darkest times for him?
I think you have to believe in yourself, believe in your mission, and know that you're going to suffer. You know, that's life. And so you've got to stay positive, and you've got to stay connected with others who are similar, who have been through something, maybe not the same as yours, but they've suffered, okay? And that will really help you believe more in yourself and encouraging each other. I think that's so important. And what do you think?
Community.
Yeah.
I think we get isolated because we're ashamed, and we think strong people don't act like this or think this way. And I think community is when he talked about that, because I certainly don't want to use his words and say his example, but when he was broken, he felt shame. When he got back together with others, there was this, if you've ever broken a bone and it mends, it's actually stronger. Right? It's actually stronger. Right? Because it gets back with that other bone. And it builds on it. And so being alone is it's not gonna go away. That's the biggest thing I would say. I want to honor people's time. And so I thought I would just, if it's okay with you, I'll just wrap this up.
Yeah.
Okay. So today, we have had a unique opportunity. I think we can all say that. I want to thank, I got a big list of people here. So Mark and Jen and the folks from Aon, thank you so much. Kevin, thank you for the coordination that you have. Jessica and Julie, thank you. You know, we were going to have coffee, and all of a sudden this happened, and it's, you know, it's just an amazing thing. For Ben and Noah at Pit Stop Creative, thank you for being here to do that. Brooks, where did he leave? Oh, I don't see him.
He's up there.
Oh, he's out there. Thank you to your son for helping us as well. This has been a treat for me. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, I have to tell you this. Years to have this kind of an opportunity. We don't do this because we just want to tell war stories. Right? We do this because we care about you and we care about your success. And if we've said something today that resonates with you, that you'd like to talk more about with us, we would be honored to have that conversation with you. If this format you think might be useful for your organization, for your boards of trustees or your boards of directors or your C-suite, or an organization that you're related to in some way that you care about, that you think that they might enjoy having this sort of an experience as well, please reach out to us. You can reach out to Kevin or you can reach out to Julie and Jessica, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about that. Here's the thing. Every time I get to be with Lee, for the next couple of days, I'm a better person. I'm a better person. I'm more caring. I'm more committed. I'm more courageous. I have better principles. I stick to them better. And that's why I do this. Because this is like going to the gym for me being a better person overall. And we would like to share that with you and your friends and your organizations because that's our goal. We've both had our time in the sun. We just want people and their organizations to grow. So if you have an opportunity or you think that that's something that we could do with you, we would be honored to do that. Again, I want to thank everybody for their time here. We're going to stick around for a little bit. We actually don't have to rush right away, but we are going to the airport. He's going to Oklahoma. I'm going to Colorado. But we'd love to just sit and chat for a little bit as well. So on behalf of Lee and all of our teams, thank you.